I believe it was 2007, when I was on the phone with a friend, and we were just chatting, and I heard a call from the bottom of the stairs. My mother sounded irate, and she yelled up to me, "Do you know anything about a MySpace page?" And I said, "Yeah, from like months ago."
How old were you?
I was 15.
What was this MySpace page?
It was a parody page about my vice principal. A couple of friends and I decided it would be funny to make fun of the school disciplinarian on the internet. And so we created this page, and I remember putting a disclaimer on it thinking, if anybody finds this, at least I can't get in trouble for it.
And you said things like, you talked about her and said she spends most of her time reading silly teen magazines, daydreaming about Johnny Depp and nothing but tidy whities, ooh la la.
Yes. Yes.
And so this was what your mother was yelling up to you about?
Yes. I mean, there were comments on there made by other kids that were not, that were obscene, and I will admit to that. But they were not my comments. I think I was held responsible for them because they were on the page.
So what happened?
Well, I mean, a lot of it is on my mom's end. She was on the phone with the police officer, and I didn't really understand what was going on.
Lorraine, can you tell us what happened with this phone call?
The officer called, asked me if Hillary's my daughter. I said yes. He said, well, I'm coming down to arrest her for making a MySpace page about her vice principal. So I yelled up to Hillary, do you know anything about a MySpace page and your assistant principal? And she's like, yeah, from like months ago. At which point the officer started shouting. I heard her, she confessed, I'm coming down there, I'm arresting her. And I'm like, whoa, you're not speaking to my daughter without an attorney, at least give me time to get an attorney. And he started shouting that that's how parents like me are. We let our kids off the hook. And because I was getting attorneys involved, he was going to charge her with internet stalking, abuse of the internet. He told me that they've been watching my internet activity and that he was coming down to arrest her. So
what about the lawyer for your daughter?
Well, I got off the phone and I'm like, now I'm thinking, where am I going to find a lawyer at this time of night? And like,
What time was it?
It was after I had come home from work, so it was in the evening, and I don't know any lawyers. We're not the kind of folks that have a lawyer on retainer. So I called my mom, and I said, do you know an attorney? And she's like, well, I do, but like not for this, and you're overreacting. Sounds like a very simple thing that happened. Call the officer back and try and talk to him. Just, follow the law, be cooperative. I'm like, okay. So I called the officer back, and he said, hey, you keep the lawyers out of it, and I'll reduce her charges to a misdemeanor of harassment. And I'm like, oh, okay, all right, we can do that. What, are you still coming down? Can you wait till, I have at least someone here while you arrest her or whatever? And he said, oh, no, I don't have to come down. We'll send you something in the mail. And then that was in January, and we didn't hear anything for months. In fact, I kept calling him saying, we haven't received anything.
So when did you hear and what happened?
We did get a paper in the mail. We had to go to juvenile probation. We had to do an interview there, bring all of her shot records, birth certificate, all that kind of thing, our financial information. They asked us some very intimate questions, which was odd.
You have no lawyer?
No, no lawyer. Again, I was told to keep the lawyer out of it and everything will go simply, and we asked the probation officer what's going to happen now, and he said, well, it'll probably be probation and possibly community service. Okay, do we get a lawyer? Like, no, that, we've done the study, you'll go to court, whatever. Okay. So then we went to court, and we walked in, and they had tables set up by last name. And we went to the table there, and they said, do you have an attorney with you? And I said, no. They said, sign here. So now I'm assuming, oh, this is where we get a public defender. And so I signed this blank form and signed. But you also have to understand that there were dozens of other parents there with their children at their last name table doing the same exact thing. So I'm like, okay, this is how it works. Then we went in a big room and we waited, and we thought the attorneys would meet us there. No one came. They said, we're going to the courtroom. We sat right outside the courtroom. No attorneys came. The prosecutor came out. The assistant principal was there. She gave him a kiss on both cheeks, asked him how the family was, and he said, "Don't worry about a thing." And we walked into the courtroom. They said, "This is the case of," and the judge stood up and started screaming at Hillary.
The judge was?
Mark Chivarella, former judge.
What was he screaming at you, Hillary?
The first thing he said to me was, "What makes you think you can do this kind of crap?" And it was really off-putting. I was there that day in my mother's clothing because she insisted that I look nice, and at 15 years old, I didn't have anything appropriate. And I'm already uncomfortable, and he started, screaming at me, "What makes you think you can do this kind of crap?" And I was just terrified. I've never been before a judge before, and I wasn't expecting to be screamed at by one. So it definitely was jarring.
And what happened?
It took about 30 seconds, so it's hard for me to have exact details. But he said something along the lines of adjudicated delinquent, which meant nothing to me. And then I remember my mother's hands leaving my shoulders, and I remember gliding as if in like a dreamlike sort of state to this back room where all I can hear is the sound of my mother's pleading, her wailing and pleading, and I'm being cuffed, and the bailiff
You're being
is
handcuffed.
saying, yes, and the bailiff says, "Look what you did to your mother," and it's. It just, like I said, it sort of like time stopped, and I began to veer off to this like parallel universe.
Lorraine, did the judge hand down a sentence right there?
Oh, yes. He said adjudicated delinquent, and he said send her up to FACT, for her to think about what she's done. And I looked at the officer, and I'm like, but that's not what you said. And I'm like looking at these people who have said, it'll be probation, possibly community service. And I'm thinking, this is crazy, because I had called, in Pennsylvania, we have magistrates. And I asked, my daughter's been accused with this statute of Pennsylvania law. I said, as an adult, what would be the maximum sentence? 1 night in jail and up to a $50 fine. So why on earth would I think they would take my daughter, who's never been in trouble? We had no family issues. We were not involved with the system in any way. Why would I think they would take my daughter away? So basically, I started, asking him, and then I became hysterical. This is the best way I can explain it.
You saw your daughter handcuffed?
No, she was like, it was very odd because my hands were on her shoulders, and as soon as he said adjudicated delinquent, I really didn't hear anything else. I had been a caseworker for 16 years, and I knew exactly what that meant. So I turned and was talking to them, and when I turned again, it was like she had evaporated. She was just gone.
I wanted to turn to our other guests in studio right now. Charlie Balasavage, talk about what happened to you. So Hillary was 15. How old were you when police first came to your house?
I was 14.
How old are you now?
I'm 23.
So you're 14 years old and the police came over.
Yes.
Why?
At first, I thought it would be because I was riding this scooter around without a helmet on because, and ended up it wasn't that. It was that someone had called, reported that scooter stolen.
Where did you get the scooter?
My parents bought it off of a family member.
They bought it for you?
Yeah, they bought
from
it
a family
for me.
member.
So my parents weren't home at the time, so I had to call them. They rushed home, and the cops,
police were there?
Yeah, the police were there. The cops arrested all three of us and took us down to the police station, and we had to write a statement and everything. We told them what happened, that we bought it, and they said, unfortunately, because we didn't have no documentation saying that they bought it from my family member, that they're going to have to charge with receiving stolen property. And so they said to my parents, if I take the charges, maybe I'll get probation, maybe not even, just community service. So I agreed to it. I was like, okay, I'll do that. books. Otherwise, my parents were going to get charged with it.
Did you have a lawyer with you?
No, no lawyer. This was all the cops' suggestion, too, that I take the charges, nothing will happen, you know. And so I was like, okay. And I ended up having to go into court. And when I went into court, it was the same thing. You walk up to that table, they have that form.
Your mom was with you?
Yeah, my mom was with me. She signed it. We didn't have a lawyer at all. We thought also we'd get a public defender. That's not what happened. We walked into the courtroom. We were literally in there for maybe a minute. And the judge already knew what he was going to do with me. I mean,
This judge was named?
Sherella. And I really don't even remember what he said clearly that I have a behavior problem because I had a speech impediment when I was younger, and because of it I was made fun of a lot in school. So I had a problem going to school, and he had records of that. So that was my big problem. He sentenced me to 3 months in a Camp Adams.
Camp Adams.
Yeah, Camp Adams.
It's called Camp Adams.
Yeah. It's like a boot camp, pretty much.
Had you ever been detained before?
No.
Did you know where you were going?
No. They shackled me right there in front of my mother and hauled me off.
And how long did you serve in jail?
It was the 3 months I had to do in Camp Adams. Then they do a follow-up where I have to go back to court. And when I went back to court, I ended up having to go to a place called Clearbrook for 3 months because I experimented with marijuana. And I was truthful with them and told them that, yeah, I tried it before. So apparently I had a drug problem at that time. So they made me do another 3 months there.
When you first went to jail, you talk in the film Cash for Kids about having to earn a pillow.
Oh, yeah, that was from my first 2 weeks at Camp Adams. They have like a system. Your first 30 days there, it's called like a ranger. You do nothing but like physical training and stuff like that. And yeah, every time I would ask for a pillow, no one would ever get me one. And finally, once I moved past that ranger stage, they move you to a different cabin. I finally got a pillow.
So ultimately, how long did you serve in prison?
Altogether, it was about 5 years.
5 years?
Yeah.
How did you end up in jail for 5 years on and off?
Probation violations.
So you would get out?
Yeah, I would get out. I would not go to school or something.
How did jail affect you?
I mean, I was in there with people that actually belong there. That I've heard things, and like I guess I could say I was influenced. I mean, by these people. Even staff would say to me, "Well, what are you doing here? Why are you here?" And I said, "I don't know."
Sandy Fonzo. Her 17-year-old son, Ed Kenzakowski, was sentenced to 30 days in a juvenile boot camp by Judge Mark Chiavarella. I began by asking Sandy to describe how her son, Ed, first came to be arrested.
Just a regular, normal, happy life we had. And the summer of his senior year, what would have been his senior year, he started, experimenting a little too, and, sneaking out of the house at night. I knew he was drinking. I always, it was just me and him. So when I did have a problem with him, it was always, I'm going to call your dad and your dad's going to come. But now he's,
He was a star wrestler?
Yeah, star wrestler. I mean, the scouts were all looking at him, many opportunities for scholarships. They were watching him since he was in junior high wrestling for high school. He just had a lot before him. You know, a lot of good. He had a girlfriend at the time that was telling me stuff about him experimenting and, just getting a little bit out of control. I would call his dad, and his dad couldn't do anything anymore. You know, he was this big kid, 6'1", and big muscles. He'd lift all the time, and not doing anything than any other, than what I did at 17 years old either. But he just had so much to lose, and it got to the point that his dad called one day and said, and Ed wasn't home. You know, he was supposed to be home. He's supposed to be in school. And he found out that he was at an underage drinking party, and he had friends that he graduated with that were cops. So he talked to them, and they were going to go in and put some, paraphernalia on him just to get him caught, get him a slap in the wrist, let him, community service, educational program, anything to let him know what, he has just too much to lose. And this is his senior year. He's wrestled since he was 4 years old. And so that's what happened. They went and got him, and they took him in. He sat to...
They planted drug paraphernalia?
Marijuana
in his
pipe.
truck?
Yes. And so...
A marijuana pipe.
Right. And so, I get the call that he's down at the police station. Juvenile court isn't until Tuesday, so for the weekend, he had to stay in jail. Tuesday comes along, and now all along, we're talking to the probation people. We're talking actually to the judge also. There was a sit down with these cops and knowing Judge Ciavarella that this was all, in his best interest, just to get him a little slap on the wrist, wise him up, scare him straight. He's a great kid. He has a great future ahead of him. And yep, we know there's, nothing you have to worry about. We don't need a lawyer. The same story. You got off the elevator and they were there. Do you have a lawyer? No, we were told we don't need one. Okay, sign. And that was it. I don't know. I was just very naive. And I mean, I was never in my wildest dreams would I think these people that are supposed to have, they were the professionals. They have your child's interests at best at heart. And these are the people that you trust, and everything's going to be okay. He's going to learn a little lesson and everything will be fine. And we stood there, and in 30 seconds, he was cuffed and shackled and taken away. And I mean, that was the worst feeling. Seeing him turn and look at me like, what's going on? There was nothing I could do. That's frozen into my psyche for the rest of my life, that look that was on his face. They took him to the PA child care and said that he would be there until he got this psychological evaluation, which we all know was Judge Conahan's son-in-law, brother-in-law. I think it was son-in-law. Yeah, that was doing these psychological evaluations. Well, it was a whole 30 days.
The other judge who ended up being convicted.
The president judge that made Judge Ciavarella the juvenile justice judge, yeah. So he sat in there for 30 days, got his psychological evaluation.
Were you able to see him?
Yes, you were allowed on certain days and certain times to go see him and talk to him, and he wanted nothing more. Mom, I know, this was so stupid. I just want to get back. I've missed so much wrestling practice. This is my senior year. All he wanted to do was get back to school. I had letters from the teachers, letters from the judges, from the coaches, in lieu of Ed's character of what a great kid he was, sent to the judge's chambers. And anyway, we had to go. So we're going now for 30 days, and I thought to myself, okay, this was good. He sat there, he got his head together, he wants to get back to school, everything's good. Well, we went and stood back in front of that judge, and he was shackled and cuffed and taken to a boot camp out in, it was Northwestern Boot Academy, an hour away from our house. Total military. They couldn't speak. They couldn't do anything. They were dressed in military attire. He was with, people from all over that committed when he would tell me the crimes that were committed, this is who my son was in with. They broke you down, tore you apart, humiliated you. He wouldn't tell me what happened when he was in there.
How long was he sentenced to Judge Ciavarella?
3 months. He went in there for 3 months, and then from there, because Ciavarella said he had a drug problem, then he would have to go to Clearbrook, which was, a rehabilitation for addictions. By the time my son got there, if he ever did have a problem with drugs or alcohol, he was never treated because they said, this kid has spent so much time already, we can't even keep him. So then he was just released and thrown back out. Get back to your life. No school, because they gave him that amount of schooling in there, so he never got to go back to his high school, never got to wrestle. He was a mess when he came out of there. He
lost all chance of scholarship.
He wouldn't talk about what happened in there.
How long had he been altogether now in jail?
3, 4. He was 1 month there, 3 months there, and like 5 months, approximately. But he came out of there a changed person. Like I said, he was a 17-year-old, free-spirited boy, and he came out a hardened man that wouldn't even talk about what in. So to this day, I don't know what happened to him in there, but he would never talk about it. But he was just a different person. You know, he very bottled up. You know, wouldn't speak. No respect for the justice system at all. He knew he was wronged. He knew what was taken away. He lost his little girlfriend while he was in there. She left him for somebody, you know. He just lost, in that age, at that impressionable late age, way too much. He had way too much taken from him, everything he had, really. And he ended up getting into a fight while he was still on probation, so he would have to go in front of Judge Ciavarella again. And now Ciavarella takes him for 4 months and sends him to his other facility out in the PA Child Care in Western Pennsylvania for 4 months now. Loses his job, loses everything again. And the people that work there couldn't understand why this almost 20-year-old is doing in this juvenile facility. Nobody understood, but he came out of there, and I mean, that was it. He ended up in a fight, which he had to go into, and the fight that he did get into, that we took to adult court, was thrown out. There was just a fight between two kids. It was nothing. But Ciavarella, you know, 4 months he went to that his other facility that they were receiving profit for, and that was it. He got into the fight. He was sentenced to a state prison for it, and he came out. He lasted for almost 5 months, and then that's it.
And he shot himself.
Yeah, in his heart.
We're talking to Sandy Fonzo. She is talking about her son, Ed Kenzikoski, who took his own life after an ordeal that lasted years, when he ended up originally in the court of Judge Ciavarella. In the midst of what you were saying, Sandy, you said you came to know that Judge Ciavarella was now being investigated, even though your son, Ed, would continue to be his victim. That takes us back to Lorene Transu now, because when Hillary was taken away from you in shackles, you started to investigate the judge yourself. Explain what happened, or at least take some action yourself.
So in the beginning, it was all about my daughter. So I don't know that any of this other stuff is going on. What happened is when they finally let me go from the room I was in immediately following the hearing, they allowed me, actually they called my husband using my phone, and it was cold, very cold that day for April, and they sat me outside the courthouse in a metal chair and told me I was not allowed to come back in. So as I sat there, I'm like, but I don't know anything. Like, where is she? Where's my information? And they handed me a business card from the probation department with a man's first name on the back of it and told me that's who I should contact. But I had no idea who that was. So my husband came and picked me up. But you're really in a state of shock when this happens, because it's so ridiculous, so just you can't fathom it. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. So that first afternoon, my father and my stepmother came. My mother was calling me. They kept saying to me, she had to have done something more. There has to be more to this. And I'm like,
more than
really,
a MySpace page.
Yeah, like, and I'm like, no, really, like,
making fun of her assistant principal.
I said, there really is nothing else. And So I just cried and cried and cried and cried. And finally my father said to me, this is not they call me Lori in my family. He says, this is not the Lori I know. She wouldn't just sit here and give up. And I'm like, but Dad, this is a judge. Like, what am I going to do? He goes, well, you're going to fight. So I called the name on the back of the card, and it turned out it was a public defender in our county. And he laughed at me when I said, you have to file an appeal. This is insane. He goes, Chiavarella doesn't allow appeals. So I'm like, are you telling me that we can't appeal, or just that it's pointless, or it's not allowed? Like, what are you saying? He goes, well, it's pointless, but Chiavarella wouldn't even like schedule it for you. I'm like, okay. So I called the public defender's office in Harrisburg. Pennsylvania's a Commonwealth, so things run a little bit differently in a Commonwealth. I called the public defender's office.
In the capital, Harrisburg.
In the capital, and they told me, well, no, of course juveniles can have appeals, but we're not getting involved in a county matter. Okay, so I called the governor's action line, and they were like, oh, we'll make note of this. I said, well, who else can I call? Try the ACLU. So I called the ACLU, I explained the situation. They said, absolutely, you have a case here. She had a right to put whatever she wants on MySpace, especially a parody, and she put a disclaimer that that's what it is, and we'd be happy to take that case, but we're not going to get involved in this county placement thing and custody. And I'm like, but now what do I do? Well, we have some other numbers, one of which was a woman at Rutgers in New Jersey. So I was like, okay, I'm a Jersey girl, maybe I'll get lucky there. So I called there, and the woman was so sympathetic, and she said, listen, I know somebody, a friend of mine works at Juvenile Law Center in Philadelphia, and since you're in Pennsylvania, maybe they can help you. So I called Juvenile Law Center, and I kind of gave them the information, and the person I spoke to, his name was Laval, and he was very, very soft-spoken, not excitable at all. So I didn't know how to read him, and he said that he would check with Marcia Levick, who was the head of the Juvenile Law Center, and find out if they could take Hillary's case. So I said, okay, and he would call me back. Well, the next day, he hadn't called me back, and so my father said, you give me that number, and he called him. The next thing I know, they were calling me, saying, yes, they were willing to take the case, but not for me. They would not be my attorney. They represent children, and they would represent Hillary as long as I was agreeable and Hillary was agreeable. Would it be okay if they met with her? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. And I said, listen, just let me know how much I have to pay, because like I do have a house. I don't have much equity, but I can get some loans and get some money together. And they're like, no, I don't think you understand. We're here for children. We want to help your daughter. Don't worry about any of that. I said, okay. So they went and saw Hillary, and for the first time we had hope. I still couldn't see her for 3 weeks. I was allowed a 1-minute phone call.
You could not see your 15-year-old daughter for 3 weeks?
No.
1 minute, 60 seconds?
Yes. That first phone call was the two of us sobbing hysterical, both apologizing to the other. It was a conversation of, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry, Mom. No, Hill, it's my fault. I'm so sorry. That was our 1 minute, and then it was over. And then the next week, I think we got 5 minutes, and the next week was 8 minutes.
It was just 8 minutes.
But somebody is there listening, and if she started to talk about anything to do with the lawyer and getting out of there, they cut her off.
I want to fast forward to 2011. Judge Chiavarella is charged, tried, and convicted. It's 8 years after Sandy Fonzo's son first was confronted by the judge and sent away. And so after Judge Chiavarella is convicted, Sandy Fonzo, who's now lost her son, Ed Kenzikoski, he shot himself in the heart, she confronts the judge.
This is not a Cash for Kids case, and we hope somebody
starts getting the message. My kid's not here anymore. My kid's not here. He's dead because of him. He ruined my life. I'd like him to go to hell and rot there forever.
Man, come on.
No, you know what he told everybody in court? They need to be held accountable for their actions. You need to be. Do you remember me? Do you remember me? Do you remember my son? An all-star wrestler? He's gone. He shot himself in the heart. You scumbag!
Talk about that, Sandy. What happened? You were there for his trial?
I planned on being, and then when it came up, I couldn't get myself to go and sit there and look at him and hear the lies, and I kept myself away until the day of the guilty, you know, when he was found guilty. I wanted to be there. I was actually working, and I kept getting messages from everybody that he's found guilty of this, he's found guilty of that, you know, and I'm having a panic attack, and they're going to take him, they're going to shackle him, and they're going to take him, and he's going away today. So I was a mess by now, an emotional train wreck, and everybody at work was like, go. I just wanted to be there. I wanted to see him come out of there in shackles, and I wanted to see him go away. And I don't know how I got myself there. Somehow I drove myself there. Nobody knew I was there, and everybody thought I was at work. I don't remember the ride at all. I just ended up there, and I heard why I'm standing out there. I learned that he is not. He's going to be released to his daughter's. I don't know, the custody, and that he won't be going to jail. So, you know, I just lost all hope again. You know, it always seems like you're just let down all the time. And they were going to do a press release, and he was coming out with his lawyer, Al Flora,
to do a press conference,
right,
on the steps of the courthouse.
the steps of the courthouse. So when he was coming, I just went with all of the media and everybody that was there, and I was just there, and I had no idea. But when they started, this was not Kids for Cats. I just lost it. I don't remember what I said. I don't remember what came out of my mouth. All I know is that all I remember is being, taken across the street after that, and that's all I remember.